Episode 261. Join a club. With flames burning around its paws, Snowflake flew steadily in the sky with Jacob on its back. As a common species left behind in the mortal world by the Sky Mountain sect, Snowflake had a very average bloodline, which meant that it had almost no chance of advancing and evolving. Although the common species of spirit beasts had traces of ancient godly beasts' bloodline in their bodies, the traces were so thin that they were extremely difficult to activate. Even the adult snow lions living in the Snow Lotus Cave on the Sky Mountain could only activate the most basic innate power, such as Fireball Spell and Frozen Spell, after eating snow lotuses for many years. However, with the large number of elixir pills Jacob fed it, Snowflake, though not an adult yet, had activated its flying ability and had even developed the fire elemental power. It meant that Snowflake, who had been despised by that girl on Fifth Heaven, now possessed the power of a level 3 spirit beast. If Jacob fed it elixir pills every day and Snowflake cultivated hard, it might have a chance to completely activate the ancient bloodline in its body and advance into a godly beast. However, Jacob and Snowflake didn't know about the situation. Snowflake just ate when it was hungry, and Jacob would feed it 2 essence replenishment pills each day to stop its badgering. Sitting on Snowflake's back and looking down at the city from a height of hundreds of meters above the ground, Jacob felt a wondrous feeling. Snowflake was also enjoying the breeze. It flew leisurely, as fast as a floating balloon. Just months ago, Jacob had never imagined that he would be able to ride a lion and look down at the entire city from the sky as an inspector. Matters with Sophie, South Atlantic, college, and more were all forgotten as he stared at the brightly lit city below him. He had wanted to live an ordinary life, but he had to adapt to the changes and get used to new things. "Snowflake, let's get down," he ordered in a low voice as he patted Snowflake's neck lightly. With a low roar, Snowflake dashed toward the campus below them. Like a shooting star, they arched toward the ground. Snowflake landed in the small forest. Jacob, who was enjoying the amazing feeling and the beautiful city view from the sky, jumped off Snowflake's back dizzily and slapped its head. "Snowflake, couldn't you land gently?" Snowflake looked at him innocently with its big and watery eyes. "Well, this is an extra elixir pill for you." After taking out an essence replenishment pill from the wooden box in his hidden space, Jacob tossed it into Snowflake's mouth. Snowflake instantly became joyous. Transforming into its mini size, it ran around Jacob's ankles, rubbing its head against his legs like a kitten. "You have no backbone." Picking it up by the back of its neck, he tossed the beast into his hidden space. During the night, the dew was substantial in this forest, and that was why no students came here. It provided Jacob with a perfect landing place. After straightening his clothes, Jacob walked out of the forest before crossing the campus and returning to his dorm. The guys were hanging out in the dorm, and they would never have imagined that Jacob had been patrolling the city in the sky. They thought he went out with Kathy, so they didn't ask him any questions when he came back to the dorm late at night, right before the gate would be locked up. Jacob was no longer the same person he was 2 months ago, but his buddies saw him every day and didn't notice the transformations. The next morning came. Sam had spent the night in the stadium practicing and didn't return to the dorm. Ever since he became the captain, he got quite busy. Seeing that his other roommates were still soundly asleep, Jacob washed up and went jogging. Cultivation could improve his physical strength, but it couldn't give him combat ability in battles. After running 20 laps around the campus, he went to the small forest where he landed last night and practiced the horse stance punch that Chief Ezra had taught him. After the high-intensity workout, he was only sweating slightly. It was still early, so he practiced the fundamental boxing techniques that he learned from the Dragon Palace. The movements were not hard for Jacob in his current state. However, it was a test of physical strength and endurance to make each movement accurate and proper. After all, this set of boxing techniques was used to train the soldiers in the Dragon Palace, and the lowest-leveled soldiers were at the second level. In other words, this set of boxing techniques with no name was the training technique for cultivators. After practicing it a few times, Jacob was soaked in sweat, even though he had reached the third level. It was a top-rated set of boxing techniques that could toughen one's muscles and bones. Sam or Ryan probably would have collapsed to the ground with fatigue after practicing only half of the boxing techniques. Some movements were beyond their strengths and abilities. If they forced themselves to do those movements, they probably would break their bones or get cramps. Exhaling deeply, Jacob walked out of the small forest and went back to his dorm to quickly get changed and retrieve his bag for the morning class. It was breakfast time, so Jacob merged into the crowds in the direction of the cafeteria, planning to have breakfast before going to class. He had just finished his breakfast when suddenly a tall and thin girl wearing a pair of glasses stopped Jacob.
"Hello."
She stared at Jacob for a few seconds before giving him a warm smile.
"Do you have any interest in joining our club?"
Jacob looked at her and shook his head. "Not interested."
"Unlike the ordinary school clubs, ours is an internal club called the Association of the Five Dragons,"
she continued. The Association of the Five Dragons? Jacob activated the Sword Shadow Scroll, looked at her carefully, and saw a pale blue light around her. She belonged to one of the water elemental dragon clans, but Jacob didn't know which branch she was from: lake, river, or stream. Seeming to have sensed Jacob's question that was on his mind, this girl introduced herself in a low voice.
"I belong to the Lake Clan. You should be a member of the North Atlantic, right? Since we belong to the same circle, we should have each other's back."
Jacob thought for a moment, but he still shook his head. When he was below third level, the so-called circle ignored him. Now that he had broken through to the third level, they immediately sent someone to recruit him, trying to pull him into their circle to strengthen their force. Jacob wouldn't fall for their tricks. Besides, there were all kinds of conflicts between the different circles, and Jacob didn't want to be a part of it. With a wave of his hand, he walked out of the cafeteria. On his way to class, several senior students came to him and invited him to join their mysterious clubs. Jacob refused them all. When he walked around the campus as a low-level cultivator who was working on the Spirit Concentration Scroll, they pretended not to see him. When some big events happened in the Dragon Tribe, and they met on the roadside to discuss, they had never thought of including Jacob. Even when Michael tried to bully him, none of the so-called fellow dragons offered help. That was why Jacob ignored them now.
"Are you sure that you won't consider our offers? We have many cultivation discussion groups, and we could trade low-tier treasures with each other inside our association." "The head of our club is a 5th-level master, and he will give you some guidance. You've just reached the 3rd level, but it's difficult to solidify your realm without the guidance of a master."
"We have many single girls in our club. If you find someone you like, you two can practice dual cultivation." Jacob's refusal didn't dissuade them. 3 representatives from 3 clubs followed Jacob tightly. "To be clear, I'll join none of your clubs." Afraid that they would follow him into the classroom, Jacob stopped to make his stance clear. "Although the 3rd level is not weak, it's not powerful either.
Since you are around the school every day, I suggest you join one of our clubs."
One of them began to threaten him.
"Well, do you mean that you guys will find opportunities to attack me if I don't join any of your clubs?"
Jacob asked them in a harsher tone.
"Right,"
the three of them answered at the same time. After all, in this city, there were only 8 cultivation clubs. None of the third-level students could stay independent. Episode 262, Susan's Substitute. They had been indifferent to Jacob when he was below the 3rd level. However, he had to join one of them now. On the surface, they talked about taking care of each other. However, their real purpose was to strengthen themselves to overpower the other clubs.
"We'll give you 3 minutes to consider. You must choose one of the 3 clubs."
The senior-looking student gave Jacob an ultimatum. They were forcing him to join one of them. They thought that Jacob wasn't very powerful as a 3rd-level cultivator. The other 2 representatives, who were girls, surrounded him with their arms crossed. Judging from the lights they emitted, Jacob knew that each of them was on or above the 3rd level. If Jacob refused to join their clubs, they would put down a red energy sphere and attack him. None of the 3rd-level students could stay out of their control. It was the unwritten rule. Of course, after a cultivator joined one of the clubs, he or she would have to contribute to the club by handing in money and offering labor. Uninterested, Jacob turned around and continued toward his class.
"Stop!"
The senior student launched an attack suddenly. As the vice president of the Sea Light Club, he was a 4th-level cultivator, and he wanted to pull Jacob into his club. Jacob blocked his arm and leaped half a step forward. Meanwhile, the other 2 representatives entered the fray. Since Jacob had explicitly told them that he wouldn't join any of their clubs, they decided to teach him a lesson. They had never paid attention to Jacob when he was below the 3rd level, so they didn't know about his close relationship with Liam and his identity as the prince of the North Atlantic Dragon Clan, the real ruler of this region. With both hands, Jacob pushed their arms away. The effects of the fundamental boxing techniques were shown in the push. Surprised, the 3 representatives immediately put nature essence into their hands before launching another round of attacks on Jacob at the same time. Since he refused to join their clubs, he became their common enemy, and they would teach him a lesson. In the horse stance, Jacob moved half a step to the left before punching at the senior student who had launched the first attack. With 5 elemental sword energy on his fist, Jacob's punch on the senior student's chest forced him back 3 steps. Jacob then turned and blocked the arms of the other 2 attackers before punching their stomachs. Instantly, the other 2, who were at top-tier 3rd level, were knocked away. Jacob had used the explosive momentum from the fundamental boxing techniques and the lightning which could break all 5 elements. All this happened in the blink of an eye. The students in the distance just saw the 3 of them leave Jacob's side abruptly, but the details were lost to them. The 3 attackers all stared at Jacob in shock. Although their attacks were not coordinated, they were all cultivators either on or above the 3rd level, and good fighters in the school. However, they couldn't even get near Jacob, a student who had just reached the 3rd level. The 2 girls felt a numb sensation in their bellies, and they couldn't activate their nature essence, as if all their energies were locked up for the time being. Lightning could break the 5 elements in nature, while the 5 elemental sword array formations were even more powerful. Since they were in a public place on the campus, Jacob had not unleashed his full strength. I'm an inspector, and you dared to attack me? Jacob brushed the dust off his clothes before looking at them coldly.
Inspector?
The 3 senior members of the cultivation clubs all looked at Jacob in surprise. They concentrated and took a closer look, and sure enough, there was a faint golden flame mark on Jacob's forehead. None of them had imagined that this young third-level cultivator would be an inspector. They were stunned. After all, attacking an inspector was a serious crime. Jacob could arrest them at this moment, since an inspector could act first and report to the headquarters later. Even as an assisting inspector, Jacob's status was many levels higher than theirs. While they engaged themselves in playful battles in the school, this sophomore had become an assisting inspector. Ignoring the stunned looks on their faces, Jacob walked past them and continued toward the class. When Jacob came to the classroom, it was already full. Ryan had occupied seats in the 3rd row, and he beckoned Jacob over. "Here, here!" He had rushed here after the morning's advanced mathematics to grab good seats. However, he was doomed to be disappointed today. Kathy and her friend walked into the room, chatting and laughing. Kathy smiled lightly when she passed Jacob, before pulling her roommate to the back row. Ryan looked back at Kathy and bumped Jacob with his elbow.
"Hey, I observed carefully in the past couple of days and found that Kathy's even more beautiful than before."
Jacob didn't think it was that surprising. He thought, after all, she has begun cultivating recently, and it enhanced her complexion. Besides, with her excellent talent, her aura and strength will improve faster than other cultivators. He didn't know that Kathy's talent in terms of cultivation couldn't get poorer. The old woman wouldn't have taken her as her last disciple if talent was the only thing she cared about. Kathy had a stone body type. She was very insensitive to the nature essence, and it was challenging for her to absorb it. The old lady planted a nascent soul realm life note in her body, so she possessed the cultivation speed of a nascent soul realm master. Despite the life note, Kathy was still in the chi refinement realm. With this insane life note, she could concentrate nature essence at a high intensity, but she could only absorb 1% of it. Even Sam or Ryan had better cultivation talent than Kathy. However, the woman saw through all that and didn't care about what realm Kathy could reach. After all, no one would dare to mess with her with the old woman as her master. Ryan turned to look at Kathy again and lamented.
"Women do get more beautiful as they mature. How come I didn't find Kathy beautiful before?"
Suddenly, the sound of high heels resonated in the corridor outside the classroom. Next to Jacob, Ryan immediately sat upright. A bit further away in the row, Sam also looked expectant. All the other guys turned their gazes toward the door as well. A teacher in business attire walked into the classroom. It was a young female teacher.
"What?"
The guys were astonished. The teacher walked to the platform.
"Ms. Susan is not available today, and I'll teach the course as her substitute for the next few weeks."
"No!" The guys were greatly disappointed. Obviously, the young substitute teacher had dressed sharply, but she could never hold a candle to Susan.
"In the next few weeks, we'll work together. My name is..."
The young teacher began to write her name on the blackboard, but the guys had no interest in knowing it. They came to the class to see Susan. Even though they couldn't talk to her directly, none of them missed a single lecture with her. They lost all interest in the course with the sudden appearance of the substitute teacher. As Susan's biggest fan, Ryan felt like he had never been this disappointed in his life. He slumped onto the desk and looked dispirited. "When will Miss Susan come back?" A guy blurted out the question to the substitute teacher.
Maybe 2 or 3 weeks. It depends on the school's scheduling. Possibly I'll teach the course from now on.
The substitute teacher looked around and said disapprovingly,
Well, if that's true, I'll skip this class in the future,
Ryan lamented. Many guys shared his thoughts, which meant that the most popular course would quickly become the most unpopular one. Meanwhile, Jacob thought about the substitute teacher's words and thought it was quite possible that Susan would take the opportunity to give up her position in the school. It was an eventful time, since the North Atlantic and South Atlantic were fighting with each other secretly, and her leisure life would come to an end. It was quite likely that she would focus her attention on her job as an inspector. However, Jacob wanted her to stay in the school. Then his cell phone vibrated. He picked it up and saw a text message from Kathy, who was sitting in the back of the classroom. It read,
What happened to Susan? Is she dealing with family issues? Do you know anything about it?
She's sick, Jacob replied to the message. He didn't think that Kathy knew about Susan's identity, so he didn't say too much.
Sick? She's taking several weeks off? Is her illness very serious? Could you contact her and tell her that we'll go visit her tonight?
Kathy's reply came instantly. Kathy was the best student in the class, and Susan had a good impression of her. Besides, Susan was exceptionally kind to her due to the mark left by a Soul Formation Realm cultivator on her shoulder that was only visible to inspectors. That was why Kathy was grateful to Susan, the cold teacher in other students' eyes.
I will tell you more about it when the class is over.
After a moment of consideration, Jacob replied. At this moment, a thick dark cloud floated across the sky above the university. With a livid face, Grandmaster Hank came to the city with 6 8th-level elders and 10 7th-level elders on a punitive expedition. Episode 263. Hand Him Over. Grandmaster Hank went to the headquarters of MTX Group with 16 senior elders. He was dressed in a black suit, while the 6 8th-level elders were wearing white suits, and the 10 7th-level elders were wearing blue suits. One could see their ranks at one glance. They walked into the Grand Hall in a pyramid-like formation with Grandmaster Hank in the front.
Sir, who are you visiting? Please register your name here.
The young receptionist saw their aggressiveness and immediately called out to Grandmaster Hank. Grandmaster Hank looked like a fit old man in his 60s, while the 16 elders behind him all looked like they were 40 to 50 years old. If they had been a group of younger men, the receptionist would have been scared. But to her, they were just a group of old men pretending to be the mafia. When she called out, the guards standing by the pathways walked over and tried to stop them. "Sir, who are you visiting? This is a private building not open to the public." With a wave of his hand, Grandmaster Hank sent the guard, who was speaking, rolling on the floor. The remaining guards immediately surrounded them. With several pushes, Grandmaster Hank sent all the guards flying backward. "The old man is a martial arts master." The captain of the security team took out his walkie-talkie and called out urgently, "Send backup to the Grand Hall." With a livid expression, Grandmaster Hank walked directly into the pathway with the 16 elders. When the captain picked up the electric baton and tried to stop them, the receptionist called out with the phone in her hand,
"The boss said just let them up."
Without stopping, Grandmaster Hank kicked the blockade in front of the pathway, and it shattered under his foot. He could have gone directly to the North Atlantic Dragon Palace to see Dracon, the Lord of North Atlantic. Instead, he came to his office with 16 elders and forced their way up, showing everyone that he was here to make trouble. They took the elevator to the top floor. In the hall, the employees of MTX Group and the pedestrians on the street all stared at the elevator in astonishment. The elevator arrived on the top floor. With a snort, Grandmaster Hank led 16 senior elders towards Dracon's office. If Dracon couldn't give him a satisfactory answer, he wouldn't mind destroying the whole building with the help of the elders. A member of the North Atlantic injured Henry, the Crown Prince of South Atlantic, and damaged his dragon core, making him drop to the 2nd level from the 3rd level. Now, Henry couldn't even use his natal treasure, the gold spear. Such a disgrace made the conflict between North Atlantic and South Atlantic escalate to a new degree. A war could break out. After all, the dragon core was foundational to a dragon, and it was related to his or her life. Since Henry's dragon core was damaged and his realm dropped, it would be extremely difficult to recover. It would even hinder his future of cultivation. This time, Grandmaster Hank healed Henry's damaged dragon core at the cost of 500 years of his own cultivation strength. Despite his efforts, Henry's 3rd level realm was not as stable as before. That explained Grandmaster Hank's burning fury. He kicked a big hole in the door to the office at the end of the corridor. Sitting in the chair behind the desk, Dracon looked up from the file in his hands. "Elder Hank, what brings you here?" The door broke out and flew onto the carpet in the office.
"I believe you know what happened to Henry."
Grandmaster Hank walked in front of Dracon and left a deep handprint on the redwood desk. The burning rage in his eyes showed that he was prepared to kill Dracon, regardless of the consequences. "I heard about the incident with Henry. It seems to me that the Dragon God Shrine accidentally hurt him in the process of capturing Reggie." Still sitting, Dracon looked up and said to Grandmaster Hank. He had received warnings when Grandmaster Hank flew across the sky above the North Atlantic's territory with 16 elders. He also knew that they came directly to his office after landing. However, no one from the North Atlantic had the power to stop Grandmaster Hank and his elders. The only thing he could do now was to think of a way to send them back. He was not pleased to see Grandmaster Hank running wild on North Atlantic's territory. However, he had no choice but to hold his anger in check.
"Dragon God Shrine?"
Grandmaster Hank stared at Dracon with his widely opened eyes.
"Reggie was indeed captured and brought to the Dragon God Shrine, but none of them dares to hurt my grandson."
Dracon put down the file and stood up slowly. "Jacob did injure him. What do you want?"
"What do I want?"
Grandmaster Hank glared at him while another handprint appeared in the redwood desk before Dracon. The files were shattered into pieces. In the past, Grandmaster Hank would never have come to North Atlantic's territory to mess with them, no matter how mad he was, let alone yelling at Dracon. But now that Kenneth had disappeared after the Heavenly Tribulation, the strength of the South Atlantic was much more than the North Atlantic. The North Atlantic Dragon Palace was protected by traps and array formations, but Hank didn't have to worry about anything when breaking into the headquarters of MTX Group. "Jacob is the Prince of the North Atlantic. If you dare to mess with him, North Atlantic won't stand by and watch." Dracon looked at Grandmaster Hank and said lightly,
"Very good."
Grandmaster Hank emitted an overwhelming pressure, causing wild winds in the entire building. With a wave of his hand, he shattered the door to his left. In the meeting room sat the elders of North Atlantic, such as Elder Frank. Grandmaster Hank raised his head and turned to the meeting room overbearingly. He emphasized each of his words.
"I will give you 3 days to hand over Jacob."
Or, Grandmaster Hank squinted his eyes, I'll get him myself. The North Atlantic elders all looked stunned. Undoubtedly, Grandmaster Hank was using this excuse to make trouble for them. If the North Atlantic handed over their prince, it would be a great humiliation to them. If the North Atlantic tried to protect Jacob, Grandmaster Hank would have a proper excuse to declare war on them. After all, although no one had witnessed the details, it was true that Jacob had injured Henry and made the Crown Prince of South Atlantic drop to a lower realm. More importantly, the combat ability of the South Atlantic was now much greater than that of the North Atlantic, so they had a louder voice. It didn't matter that Jacob could justify himself. Since he had injured the Crown Prince of South Atlantic, Grandmaster Hank had every reason to cause trouble. None of them knew that a human cultivator on the Soul Formation realm was involved in the incident, and that officials in the Dragon God Shrine did not personally capture Reggie. However, even if they had known about it, a human cultivator on the Soul Formation realm wouldn't get involved in the internal conflicts among the dragon clans. Anyway, Grandmaster Hank would hold North Atlantic accountable no matter what. I must have him in 3 days. By the way, his title of assisting inspector is nothing to me. After issuing the threat, Grandmaster Hank stomped out of the office, leaving behind a few footprints on the floor. Even official inspectors had to make ways for Grandmaster Hank, the ruler of a significant region. While Susan was recovering from her injuries in the North Atlantic Dragon Palace, Grandmaster Hank didn't think that the distant Dragon God Shrine would offend him by helping an assisting inspector. Standing behind his desk, Dracon looked at the mess in the room before turning to look at the elders in the meeting room. Several elders sitting by the rear side of the table looked at him as if they wanted to say something. Anyone who dares to suggest that we should hand over Jacob will end up like this bead. Dracon pointed at a glass bead on a shelf full of handcrafted items, and that bead shattered instantly. Episode 264, Frank's Martial Arts Academy. After his second class, Jacob walked out of the classroom with the guys. Jacob! Kathy called out to him at the door. The guys started snickering and pushed him back toward the classroom before walking toward the stairs. Kathy quickened her steps. Did you forget the thing about Susan? Oh, Jacob nodded at her reminder. In the class, he had been busy copying practice questions for tonight's tutoring session, and was now a bit dizzy. Ms. Susan, how is she now? With the bag on her back, Kathy walked to Jacob's side. She is injured, Jacob said. Injured? Is it serious? Kathy asked anxiously. She needs a few weeks to recover, Jacob told her while walking to the stairs. Kathy walked alongside him. I want to visit her. Can you take me to her? Kathy asked after a moment of consideration. She doesn't live on land. I need to ask first before I can tell you if I can take you to her, Jacob told her. That's okay, Kathy said. Tell me tomorrow if you get a reply. Jacob hesitated for a few seconds before asking her, How much do you know about me? Kathy looked around and made sure that they were alone near the stairs. She said, I only know that you are also cultivating. Oh, it feels like you and I are not in the same circle. Not in the same circle? Jacob thought for a while and knew she was right. After all, Kathy didn't have a dragon core, and he couldn't see any light around her. What's the Dragon God Shrine? Kathy asked. She had been caught off guard by the incident with Henry. Later, when she had time to think about it, she was full of questions. Dragon God Shrine is a major organization like the United Nations. It can put sanctions on cultivators and is also a place for arbitrations and rulemaking. Jacob told her what he knew about the organization. In fact, he didn't know a lot about the Dragon God Shrine, except the fact that inspectors belonged to Dragon God Shrine. He didn't know how many inspectors it had or where it was located.
United Nations?
Kathy asked casually, "Are there any permanent members in there?" "I don't think so." While they talked, they walked out of the building. However, Kathy's casual question made him think. The dragon tribe was divided into 5 smaller clans, including metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. The proud metal dragons had the lowest number, while the water dragon clan had the most substantial number of members, including the branches of river, lake, and ocean. Among them, the 4 ocean dragon palaces were undoubtedly the dominant forces, each of which governed hundreds of thousands of members. Faced with such major powers, even the Dragon God Shrine, which was supposed to oversee all the dragons in the world, wouldn't challenge them without considering the consequences. From this perspective, the 4 ocean dragon palaces were just like the so-called supernations. The supernations showed respect to the Dragon God Shrine, while the latter would occasionally bring 1 or 2 bad guys from the supernations to law, but it would never touch the core interests of the 4 ocean dragon palaces. It meant that when 2 supernations fought, the Dragon God Shrine would have to stand by and watch. If the South Atlantic took all the land territories from the North Atlantic by force, the North Atlantic force, led by Drakon, would have to retreat to the Dragon Palace. If they engaged in a war, the North Atlantic would lose due to its weaker strength. If they admitted defeat without a fight, the North Atlantic would have to give up the huge business empires they have operated on land for decades to the South Atlantic. It would be impossible to count on the Dragon God Shrine to do them justice.
"What are you thinking? You look so serious all of a sudden."
At Jacob's silence, Kathy turned to look at him and asked, "Nothing." Jacob looked at her, grateful for her previous comment, which made him understand the whole situation. He had thought South Atlantic was only pressuring them and wouldn't dare make a move. Now that he thought about it, he realized that Henry's provocations were just part of the South Atlantic's strategy. If they couldn't stand Henry's provocations and attacked him, the South Atlantic would use this excuse to declare war against them. As the Crown Prince of South Atlantic, Henry was certainly not the moron he appeared to be. However, South Atlantic didn't expect that Reggie would be captured and Henry would get severely injured.
"Hey, anything wrong?"
Seeing Jacob was in deep thought again, Kathy waved her hand before his eyes. "Nothing," Jacob said and shook his head. It seemed that he had entered their trap. He thought Henry was a stupid rich kid and injured him severely in rage. It was just what the South Atlantic needed. "This weekend I'll go visit that old woman with you." Jacob turned to Kathy and said. Jacob was sure that the master who destroyed Reggie with one strike from the sky was that old woman. However, Kathy shook her head slightly.
"She said she doesn't want to see you. Besides, she said she wouldn't be bothered with other people's business."
"She doesn't want to see me?" Jacob looked at Kathy and guessed it was probably because of his complicated relationship with her.
"I'm going to the library. Are you coming with me?"
Kathy asked him instead. "No," Jacob shook his head.
"Well, I'm off to the library then. Tell me tomorrow if I can go visit Miss Susan."
She walked to her bike, parked outside the building. Then she rode it slowly toward the library in the distance. Jacob thought about it and was sure that the old master wouldn't intervene in the conflict between the dragon clans. She had placed issues before the dragon god shrine, which showed her reluctance to interfere with internal business in the dragon tribe. It wouldn't affect her even if South Atlantic and North Atlantic butchered each other. Watching Kathy's bike disappear around the corner, Jacob sighed before walking toward the gate of the school. Everyone thought he and Kathy were dating. The fact was, they lived their separate lives and didn't bother each other. Since their secrets were shared, they could both relax in each other's company. While Jacob was cultivating, Kathy was also cultivating. She knew she had to work hard to improve herself to enter Jacob's world. Jacob walked out of the school gate and had a simple sandwich for lunch. Since there was no class that afternoon, Jacob decided to finally check out Elder Frank's martial arts school downtown. Elder Frank's martial arts school was located on the west end of Madison Road, which was one of the busiest streets in the city. Jacob came to the door and saw the huge signboard above it, Frank's Martial Arts Academy. The school was named after Elder Frank himself. At the sight of the signboard, Jacob remembered a recent news report which said a martial arts training center named Frank's Martial Arts Academy had been expanding all over the country in recent years. By now, they had opened locations in 15 cities, and the school in this city was the headquarters. After a short pause at the gate, Jacob stepped into the majestic-looking school. The moment he walked in, he saw a group of young people practicing in the hall. They were divided into two groups. One group was obviously disciples of the school, since they had brawny physiques and standard movements. The other group was people with different physiques and clumsy movements. They were evidently city people who came here to work out. It was noon, and the employees working in the nearby office buildings took a long lunch break to exercise here. Nowadays, weight training, yoga, and Pilates were quite popular, and this martial arts school had become a popular workout place in the city. Of course, becoming the most popular workout place in the city was only one of the functions of Frank's Martial Arts Academy. A more important service was to train over 6,000 professional security guards each year for all walks of life. The moment Jacob walked into the hall, a disciple from the reception immediately came over and greeted him. "Hello. Are you here to learn martial arts or to visit a friend?" "I'm here for Frank," Jacob said. "Our boss?" The young disciple looked at Jacob. "Are you Jacob Brown?" "Yes," Jacob answered. The disciple's attitude got even more respectful. "The boss has arranged a special space for you. Please follow me." Jacob nodded and followed him. The disciple didn't have any lights around him. It could be either because he was a master who had concealed his power, or he was just an ordinary trainee here. These trainees, or disciples, were here to learn martial arts. The school provided them with meals and boarding, and they must work very hard. They were tested regularly on martial arts and conduct, and those who failed the tests would be ousted. After they passed the final test, Frank's Martial Arts Academy would offer them jobs with steady and competitive salaries. Besides, as graduates from Frank's Martial Arts Academy, the disciples enjoyed an excellent reputation. Elder Frank was a short man, but his strategic vision was indeed great. Crossing the hall, they went into the backyard. VIP training rooms lined both sides of the corridor that led to the backyard. Jacob saw some VIP members taking private lessons in the rooms, and their masters were the senior disciples of the school. Operating in such a big place downtown showed Elder Frank's influence. He was also managing the most luxurious restaurant in the city. These businesses were only a small part of the North Atlantic's on-land empire. Jacob could only imagine their great business powers in the whole region, other parts of the country, and even overseas. "Well, well, if it isn't the sophomore," When Jacob was passing a VIP training room, an annoyingly familiar voice came from it. Episode 265, Practicing with Snowflake. On hearing that voice, Jacob stopped and looked in. Sure enough, Michael was practicing in that VIP room, and with him was the Taekwondo club's captain of their rival university, who had come to their university for the club exchange activities and ended up getting beaten up by Jacob. Soaked in sweat, they were both dressed in the trainee costumes of the school. Their instructor was a tall young disciple of the school. At the sight of the rival team's captain, Jacob was both surprised and amused. Jacob had thought he was an excellent Taekwondo practitioner, but now he realized this captain had improved his strength with the practice of the higher-level martial arts, before showing the strength disguised as Taekwondo. The friendship between Michael and this captain showed that Michael had directed this captain to trash their university's Taekwondo club and mess with Jade and Julia. He did it because the sisters had refused his pursuit and joined the Taekwondo club, making the Taekwondo club more popular than his rock climbing club. Since he couldn't retaliate himself, he made his friend, who was from another college, challenge their Taekwondo club. It was quite despicable of him. "Do you know how much it costs to be here for 1 hour? Do you think you can afford such a place?" Wiping his sweat with a white towel, Michael walked to the door and taunted Jacob. During the club exchange activities, he saw Jacob fight without any techniques and thought Jacob was here to practice martial arts. He was about to mock Jacob some more when the young disciple, who had been teaching Michael martial arts, cupped his hands to the young disciple showing the way for Jacob, saying respectfully, "Master." The young disciple beside Jacob just nodded. "The punch you just showed needed to move upward a bit more with less strength. Keep it up." "Thank you for the tip, Master." Ignoring him, the young disciple with Jacob bowed to him respectfully and pointed his arm. "Mr. Brown, please continue. As instructed by the boss, your room is the supreme training room in the innermost part of the school." "Okay." Jacob continued walking. After all, he was now a cultivator. He wouldn't lower himself to Michael's level and bicker with him. Michael's eyes widened while he watched Jacob walk forward. "Did he pay for the most expensive room?" "It's not the most expensive room because it's not open to the public at all." Michael's instructor corrected him with a bit of envy in his voice. As Jacob proceeded forward, he came to a door with a sign that read, "Supreme." After Jacob opened the sliding door, he noticed that the room wasn't as big as he thought it would be. In the middle of the room, there was a round altar made of materials that looked like gold and wood. The young disciple who led Jacob into the room took 2 emerald stones out of his chest pocket and put them into the dent of the round altar. Suddenly, the dark round altar started shining. If a human cultivator who was on or above 5th heaven saw this scene, he would have screamed, "2 top-tier spirit stones for a small, short-distance teleportation array? Such a waste!" "This room is only a teleportation point. The real cultivation site is located somewhere else," the young disciple said to Jacob. Jacob now knew that this young disciple was also a member of the North Atlantic. Furthermore, his level was definitely higher than Jacob's, and that was why Jacob couldn't observe his true strength. Jacob fixed his shirt and stepped onto the round altar. As the disciple started filling the round altar with his nature essence to activate the 2 spirit stones, Jacob suddenly felt a moment of dizziness. When he looked around again, Jacob found himself standing on top of another round altar in an area of trees all around it. A disciple from the Martial Arts Academy was standing right beside the round altar. responsible for guarding the teleportation array. Beside him were many white spirit stones, and he was cultivating with his eyes closed. As Jacob appeared, the disciple raised his hands toward him. "What is this place?" Jacob asked. "We're just a little outside the city. When you finish cultivating, you can go back to the city anytime you want," he replied to Jacob. Not everyone knew that Jacob was the North Atlantic Prince, especially the low-ranked soldiers. Like this cultivator, who was guarding the teleportation array, he had no idea that the prince was standing right in front of him. He thought Jacob was just a normal third-level cultivator. Therefore, his attitude wasn't particularly respectful either. Of course, Jacob didn't mind this. As he saw the young disciple close his eyes and start cultivating once again, he walked towards the clearing surrounded by trees. Shallow blue lights surrounded the border of the clearing. Jacob guessed that the cultivation site was protected by an array formation so that even when an ordinary human entered, he or she would not be able to see anything. As Snowflake woke up from a nap, it started jumping up and down in the hidden space. When Jacob released it from the necklace, it started running around in the forest. However, a moment later, Snowflake lost its interest as it realized the forest was nothing special. It started walking toward Jacob with its curled-up tail. It then raised its head and started sticking its tongue out, telling Jacob that it wanted some elixir pills. "Snowflake, turn big and go over there, 100 meters away." Jacob picked it up and threw it a few meters ahead. Snowflake didn't seem to understand and thought Jacob was playing with it, so it ran back to Jacob excitedly. Go there." Jacob tried to gently push it away. Snowflake decided to hug Jacob's leg and act like a spoiled pet. "I'm not playing with you." Jacob grabbed it again and threw it to the front. Snowflake rolled in the air. Then, when it was about to hit the ground, its body suddenly turned big. Jacob was not too worried about being a little rough with Snowflake sometimes, because act as it may, it was not actually a puppy. Snowflake was a spirit beast who was supposed to be mighty and fierce. Before it could steady itself, Jacob released a water elemental sword energy from his finger and shot it towards Snowflake. Snowflake looked at Jacob innocently. It could not believe that its master, who normally treated it well, would suddenly attack it. As it could feel the sword energy flying toward it, Snowflake rolled on the ground lazily and avoided the attack. "You care for nothing but food. It is time to train you." Jacob released another metal elemental sword energy. Snowflake finally realized that Jacob wasn't playing with it. Therefore, it immediately moved and tried to avoid the sharp sword energy. The sword energy hit the rock behind Snowflake and left a mark. Jacob lowered the power of the sword energies to the minimum. Therefore, even if Snowflake got hit, it would not suffer any injuries and would only feel a pinch-like pain. If one compared Snowflake's strength to Jacob's, Snowflake would be stronger. However, it was too lazy, and that was why Jacob had to spur it on. Jacob released 2 sword energies once again. Snowflake jumped high up into the air and flipped beautifully as it avoided the sword energies. However, when it landed on the ground, it stuck out its tongue and started panting. Although it has been eating elixir pills every day, it was always sleeping. Because of its lack of exercise, Snowflake had gained weight since the time it was released from the Sky Mountain cave. "It won't be good if I don't force you to lose weight." As Jacob thought about it, he shot 3 sword energies continuously. Snowflake rushed to hide, but a wood elemental sword energy still hit its back, causing some pain. Jacob did not give it any chance to rest as he released 3 more sword energies. Snowflake's golden paws suddenly shot out flames, and it flew higher into the air. "Oh, you can't beat me, so you'll run?" Snowflake stuck its tail up and quickly flew high up into the air. Yet Jacob did not show any mercy and continued to shoot fire elemental sword energies upward. Snowflake flew at an extremely fast speed. Its flying speed seemed much faster than before. Now, Jacob knew that it was even lazy during flying him before. Jacob threw 10 sword energies and created an escape-proof net, blocking Snowflake from all directions. As Snowflake realized there was no way it could fly over the sword energies, it gave its best and tried desperately to fly higher. However, with a loud banging noise, Snowflake's head hit the invisible ceiling as it has flown to the end of the protection array. Episode 266. Snowflake, the Mighty Snow Lion. 4 sword energies directly hit its belly. Snowflake grimaced in pain as it flipped its paws. It flipped twice in the air and spat out fire toward Jacob, who was on the ground. A fireball flew toward Jacob at great speed. "All right." Jacob steadied himself as his hands started sparkling and he caught the fireball, which was shot as a protest by Snowflake. Lightning could break the 5 elements of the world. Snowflake's fireball was made from the fire element. The fireball broke apart instantly and was turned into pure elements. Jacob then used the Sword Shadow Scroll to absorb the elements. At the same time, he waved his left hand and shot 5 sword energies toward Snowflake again. As Snowflake realized it couldn't escape, it decided not to dodge anymore. It roared and spat fire. The fire melted all 5 sword energies and flew toward Jacob. Water Elemental Array Formation. 16 pure water elemental sword energies formed a line and flew towards the fire. Water countered fire. The water elemental sword energies created a big hole in the middle of the fireball, and the forces of the sword energies' rotation put out the fire and continued to fly towards Snowflake. Snowflake had its eyes wide open, and its spirit beast potential erupted once again. It spat fire and formed many arrows, as it was imitating Jacob's sword energies. The 2 long arrows collided in midair. The white essence and the red essence formed 2 spheres and started spreading outwards. And the forces caused by the collision destroyed and broke the rocks and trees in the surrounding area. The cultivator, who was guarding the teleportation array and was resting with his eyes shut, opened his eyes as he felt the entire area shake. He has seen cultivators practicing by themselves or with each other, but never with a spirit beast. Although there were spirit beasts inside the Dragon Palace, they were all on the lower levels. Those who could spit fire would be considered a high-level spirit beast. 7 sword energies were shot toward Snowflake once again. The cultivator shockingly looked at Jacob, who was on the ground shooting sword energies. "What kind of technique is that? His body is covered in blue light, but he was using the techniques of 5 different elements. Does he practice a 5-elemental technique?" Snowflake, who was in the air, spat fire again. Spirit beasts were tamed demon beasts. The fire they spat was no ordinary 5-element flames. The hot, sizzling fire burnt the 7 sword energies to ashes in an instant. The fireball was rotating at an extreme speed and continued flying towards Jacob. Snowflake started to use its full strength, as Jacob had made it very desperate. Jacob noticed that the fireball was extremely powerful. Therefore, he would not dare to catch it. Instead, he moved aside immediately, avoiding the attack. It seemed like Snowflake held back a little, as the fireball was powerful but slow. The fireball hit the ground and created a huge pit in the ground. The cultivator, who was guarding the teleportation array, was left speechless.
Is that really what a third-level cultivator's power looks like? Even the fireball shot by the spirit beast has reached the power of the 3rd level. I'm afraid that this young-looking cultivator has the power of the 7th level.
Snowflake was a bit angered as it raised its head midair. The fireball attack was almost as strong as Jacob's lightning. In the forest, essence fluctuation came wave after wave. Jacob could feel that Snowflake was consuming nature essence to fill itself up. The last time, when they were fighting against Henry, it couldn't supplement its essence, and now, inside the protection array, it could supplement its essence from the protection array anytime it wanted. Its face started glowing red as it was preparing for the next round of attacks. Snowflake absorbed the abundant nature essence, and its next attack would be at least 5 or 6 times stronger. 80 sword energies instantly formed around Jacob's body. As Jacob has reached the 3rd level, he could use the snake array formation, which was beyond the basic array formations. The reason why he came to this huge practice arena was to learn how to use this sword array. 80 sword energies appeared out of Jacob's body and were floating around his body. The sword energies were pointing upwards and starting to move on Jacob's command. The cultivator, who was guarding the teleportation array, had never seen such a ray formation before. He was so mesmerized that he couldn't breathe. Snowflake released the fireball. The fireball started expanding into a giant, terrifying fireball with a diameter of 1 meter. The burning heat was tumbling down and was about to burn everything. Although Jacob was 100 meters away from the heat, his hair suddenly turned dry as if it was going to start burning. This was the power of the spirit beast's fire. The cultivator, who was watching, hurriedly placed 2 high-tier spirit stones into the round altar. They were risking their lives, not practicing. Half of the forest would be gone if the giant fireball hit the ground. It was at this moment Jacob's 80 sword energies flew up at the same time. The snake array formation. The 5 elemental sword energies meshed together and formed a head and a tail as they started making some creaking noise. In a dazzling light, 80 sword energies formed a long snake and started rushing towards the fireball. The fireball collided with the sword energies. The sharp sword array went through the fireball and created a big hole in the middle. Yet the fireball continued to fall. The fireball hit the ground and created a huge pit, much bigger than the last one. Although Jacob dodged it immediately, some of his hair was burned, and a few holes appeared on his clothes because of the fire. Above the sky, the sword energies continued to shoot towards Snowflake. Dispersion. Jacob controlled the sword energies with his mind. The sword energies that were all lined up before were broken up into 80 sword energies with different colors. It was at that moment that Jacob realized that his skill of controlling the sword energies has improved to another level. Not only could he release and pull back the sword energies, but he could also... High up in the air, Snowflake was surrounded by 80 rotating sword energies. As Jacob learned how to use the snake array formation, he could now control the sword energies freely. The watching cultivator was utterly shocked. Not only could this 20-year-old cultivator release 80 sword energies, but he could also control them to go anywhere he wanted them to go? And the attack that smashed the fireball, only a 4th-level cultivator could have that kind of power, right? As 80 sword energies surrounded Snowflake, it started to get a bit dizzy and angry. It suddenly opened its mouth and swallowed the 4 closest sword energies into its stomach. As Jacob hesitated for a moment when he noticed he had lost control of 4 sword energies, Snowflake swallowed 3 more sword energies. Snowflake was a spirit beast. It would eat all kinds of essences. Even though Snowflake was desperate, it held back and only consumed a few sword energies. In a real fight, it could swallow all kinds of attacks. Jacob saw that the situation was getting a little out of hand, and he immediately pulled back the rest of the sword energies into his body. If Snowflake continued to consume the sword energies, all his training and cultivation in the past few months would have gone to waste. All right, you won. Jacob waved at Snowflake and threw 2 elixir pills to it. Snowflake, who was angry till now, saw the pills and immediately descended onto the ground. After this fight, Jacob could no longer call Snowflake a little puppy, as it was indeed a combat-type snow lion. All it needed was more training and to gain more combat experience. Let's go. It's time to go to Soph's house. As Jacob saw Snowflake munching the elixir pills and leaning on his leg, he picked it up and put it into his necklace. The snake array formation was so powerful that it was comparable to the power of a 4th-level cultivator. As for Snowflake, it seemed like even 3 or 4 3rd-level cultivators together wouldn't be able to defeat it. If North Atlantic and South Atlantic started fighting against each other, Jacob believed that he and Snowflake could have a chance of surviving. Episode 267. Pick a Side. Jacob tossed Snowflake into his hidden space before walking to the teleportation array formation again. This time, the cultivator guarding the teleportation array formation looked at Jacob in a new light. His eyes were filled with respect and a little fear. After the 2 spirit stones were placed in the round altar, he immediately activated the array formation. Jacob stepped onto it and instantly returned to the Supreme Training Room. The disciple who had led Jacob into the room was sitting beside the teleportation array formation, cultivating while waiting for him. Sensing the fluctuations of nature essence, he looked up and saw that Jacob had returned. Immediately, he walked over to him. "Mr. Brown, how was it?" "It's a good place." Jacob looked at him. "Isn't Elder Frank in the school today?" "He is out dealing with something urgent." "Oh." Jacob didn't pursue the topic any further, thinking that Elder Frank must be very busy as one of Dracon's essential assistants. He didn't know that Elder Frank was in fact at the MTX Group headquarters talking about the issue regarding South Atlantic. The disciple led Jacob out of the room toward the main gate of the hall. "Mr. Brown, the boss told me to give you this if you are satisfied with the room. It's a Supreme VIP card. With it, you can practice at any of the Academy's branches anytime you like. Besides, if you have any other problems, all the schools will help you solve them." He took out a card and handed it to Jacob. Jacob put the card into his wallet. As the martial arts school branched all over the country, Frank's Martial Arts Academy provided training services and personal protection to the owners of the Supreme VIP cards. Although this card was not necessary for Jacob, who had reached the 3rd level, it was beneficial to those who were concerned about their safety in the big cities. This exquisite Supreme VIP card was available only to the most elite people and couldn't be obtained through money. When the disciple walked Jacob to the door of the school, Jacob checked his watch and found that it was already 4 o'clock in the evening. He and Snowflake had spent a whole afternoon practicing in the forest. By now, Michael and his friend had left the school, and Jacob didn't care about their whereabouts. He now knew that captain's combat skills came from the training sessions in the academy, since Michael had bought a silver membership for him. In one corner of the hall, several brawny disciples were talking loudly around the workout equipment. It was pretty quiet. The clients who came here to work out during lunch break had all left. A new wave of clients wouldn't come until after 5. Seeing that Jacob was looking at the equipment, the disciple guiding Jacob asked him,
Mr. Brown, would you like to try it?
Since it was still early, Jacob decided to see what they were talking about. As they went over, the boisterous disciples all quieted down and greeted the disciple who was guiding Jacob.
Master.
Well, keep at it. The disciple waved at them. He turned to Jacob.
This is a machine used to measure strength. Mr. Brown, you may try it if you like.
Compared with the disciples in the academy, Jacob's physique looked quite thin and weak. Hearing their master's words, the disciples all looked toward Jacob curiously. Before they entered the academy, they had all practiced for years by themselves. Today, a junior disciple had just joined the school, and they were here to measure the junior disciple's strength. Okay, I'll try it. Ever since he started cultivation, Jacob had never measured his strength. He walked to a huge wall pulley, gripped the handle, and exerted some force. 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600. 600 pounds of strength in one arm. Wow! The disciples around him all gasped. The new disciple had meant to show off his strength before the senior disciples, but now he was stunned at Jacob's strength. Jacob released the handle slowly and nodded slightly when he saw the number. 600 pounds. However, he had not used his nature essence yet. The number would be much greater if he used it.
Would you like to try the other equipment?
The disciple asked Jacob. No, I'm heading back now, Jacob said. Stunned, the disciples looked at Jacob as he left, and they finally remembered to exhale.
Obviously, he is a master and a friend of the boss, they thought.
The disciple walked Jacob to the door of the academy. Jacob thanked him before taking a bus back to his college. Then he grabbed the tutoring materials and went to Sophie's home. It was not yet 5 o'clock when he got to Sophie's home. Helen was at home. Hey, Helen. Jacob put down the material and greeted Helen, who was rinsing vegetables in the kitchen. Hello, Jacob. You were early today, Helen answered from the kitchen. I had no class this afternoon, so I came early. Jacob walked into the kitchen. Can I help you with something? Helen didn't refuse the help. She stepped away from the sink and said, Help me rinse the vegetables, and I'll chop the potatoes. Okay. Jacob turned on the tap water and rinsed the vegetables in a big bowl. Even though he had 600 pounds of strength in each arm, his hands were light when doing housework. According to martial arts theory, martial arts were used to temper bodies and stop atrocities. The purpose of martial arts was not for violence or killing. It was for the protection of the people. That was why Jacob put more restraint on himself while his strength grew. However strong he grew, he would never regard the mortals as worthless beings. I talked to your grandmother on the phone a couple of days ago, and she told me that your parents would be coming back next week. Is that so? Helen asked Jacob while chopping potatoes. Yeah, I guess, but they'll probably postpone their return since they're always busy. Jacob continued to rinse another batch of vegetables. When they come back, maybe we can all go out for dinner together, Helen suggested. Sure, Jacob nodded. At Helen's unexpected dinner invitation, Jacob knew she wanted to talk to his parents about something. Since his parents were not back yet, he didn't pursue the topic. Oh, Helen, I need to ask you about something. Jacob stopped rinsing the vegetables and turned to look at her. Oh, what is it? Helen asked lightly. Kathy, who you met once, wants to visit Susan, Jacob said. I have a vague memory of her. Helen picked up another potato and squinted her eyes slightly. She's also cultivating, right? You know about that? Jacob asked without thinking. On the second thought, this city was in the territory of the North Atlantic, and any minor or significant events in the city couldn't escape their eyes. Yeah, she's also cultivating. Since she has no dragon core, she's one of the human cultivators, right? Jacob asked. Yeah, a human cultivator. Helen bit her lip. Since her master remained on land, her master must be a soul formation realm cultivator. When the Nine-Dragon Palace appeared above our city, the cultivation sects on and above Fifth Heaven sent out many human cultivators, so their existence is no longer a secret. Helen paused for a few seconds before continuing. In the past, the conflicts between them and us were small-scale. But this time, the human cultivators experienced heavy casualties, and the relationship between us became a bit tense. You mean... Jacob was baffled. Helen turned to look at Jacob. We can't offend a soul formation realm cultivator. Since Kathy is the disciple of this Grand Master, we North Atlantic Dragon Clan, as the host, need to be nice to her. However, the relationship between the human cultivators and dragon cultivators is not as harmonious as it appears, and that's why the Grand Master behind your classmate Kathy will not help us if North Atlantic and South Atlantic start a war. After a pause, she continued. What I want to say is that the North Atlantic Dragon Palace is our home base, and thus is not open to human cultivators by principle. However, her wish to visit Susan is out of her kindness. I mean, she can visit Susan, but she's not allowed to see the details of the place. Shall we blindfold her? That's the only solution. If your classmate agrees to be blindfolded, we can let her into the Dragon Palace. Helen gave him a definite answer. Okay, I'll talk to her about it. Jacob nodded. Another thing, Jacob. Helen continued to stare at Jacob. It seems like you are close with this classmate of yours. Jacob looked at her in surprise. I know you are good to Soph, and that you have kept your distance with Kathy, but you must take a stand. Jade and Julia came from the heavenly realm and have nothing to do with us. Their close relationship with you is a good thing for our clan. Susan is an inspector, and your relationship with her poses no problem. However, Kathy is one of the human cultivators. Then she changed her tone abruptly. What I mean is that I have no problem with it if Jade and Julia want to follow you and serve you for the rest of your life. They are nice girls and they are good to Soph. However, I think it might not be appropriate for you to keep a human cultivator so close by your side. Jacob was surprised that Helen would bring up this topic. He was speechless and got lost in his thoughts. Anyway, you just need to know where you stand. I'm not pressuring you. As long as you are good to Soph, I won't mind other things you do. I just think that if it ever came down to it, Kathy will never take our side. Helen said slowly as she opened the lid of the pot. Episode 268. Did we kiss? Jacob remained silent while he continued helping Helen cook, and Helen turned her attention back to the cooking, working smoothly with Jacob. When the dinner was almost ready, Sophie and Dracon returned. They had gone to the market to get some school supplies for her. Due to the tense situation with the South Atlantic, Dracon had been personally driving Sophie to and from school and anywhere else she needed to go in the last couple of days. He had arranged for some elders to patrol around Sophie's school as well.
Mom, today's dinner smells especially good.
Sophie stepped into the kitchen.
With Jacob's help, I had more time to add some of your favorite dishes,
Helen answered with a smile.
Well, maybe he should start helping you every day.
Sophie smiled brightly at her mother and then stole a quick glance at Jacob. Jacob smiled too. He guessed that Sophie's good mood was due to Henry's absence from school. "Tonight's dinner smells good." Even Dracon praised in a loud voice from the living room.
"Of course, it's my favorite food after all."
Sophie skipped out of the kitchen joyously. She was extremely pleased when she heard that Henry dropped to a lower realm in cultivation, but she didn't realize the consequences of the incident. "Okay, dinner's ready." Helen walked out of the kitchen carrying 2 dishes. Sophie came over and picked up 2 pieces of chicken with her hands and put them into her mouth. "You greedy little cat." Placing the dishes on the table, Helen patted Sophie's forehead lightly, and Sophie just gave her mom an innocent smile. Then, Jacob walked out with another 2 dishes. "There's 1 more dish in there. Do something useful and go get it." Helen reached out and pinched Sophie's nose. Okay. Sophie strode into the kitchen and carried a big bowl out of the kitchen. Putting down the newspaper, Dracon walked to the dinner table and sat down. "Let's eat." Helen took off her apron and exhaled deeply. Obviously, she put in the effort every day to cook delicious food. "Jacob, sit down for dinner. You worked for more than half an hour with me." Helen pulled Jacob to sit down at the table. Jacob looked across the table at Dracon and asked, "Sir, is there any news about the South Atlantic?" "Grandmaster Hank came with 16 elders today, and they are staying in a hotel here. For now, there's nothing serious," Dracon said. "That old man came? It doesn't bode well if he's here, right?" Sophie picked up her spoon and asked. "Don't worry about this stuff, Soph." Dracon dismissed Sophie. Sophie frowned. "Jacob can participate in the clan's business and I can't?" she thought. "Today, I went to Elder Frank's martial arts school, and the power of the Sword Shadow Scroll is getting greater," Jacob reported. "Good. The cultivation process can't be rushed." Dracon nodded. He saw that Jacob had advanced from the 2nd level to the 3rd level, but he didn't mention it because he didn't want Jacob to get too proud. Besides, in Dracon's eyes, the fact that Jacob had reached the 3rd level wouldn't help the current situation. "Snowflake is more powerful than before as well," Jacob continued. "Snowflake?" Sophie's eyes lit up as she looked up. "It's been a while since I last saw it." Vaguely hearing Sophie's voice, Snowflake got agitated in the necklace. Jacob opened the hidden space and released Snowflake from it. "Snowflake!" Sophie put down her spoon and picked it up. "Soph, you haven't finished your dinner yet." Helen knocked on the table to remind Sophie. "Mom, give Snowflake something to eat." Ignoring Helen's warning, Sophie lifted Snowflake above her head and tossed it up into the air. With sparks of flames bursting from its paws, Snowflake began to fly around the spacious living room. When its paws were enveloped in flames, its mouth opened and spat out sparks of fire. It was a magnificent sight. This instantly attracted Helen and Dracon's attention. They wondered, is it really only an ordinary level 2 spirit beast? How could it use such power in its mini form? "Snowflake, transform!" As if she was training a lion in the circus, Sophie patted Snowflake's back a little when it flew back to her. It immediately turned into a normal-sized snow lion with golden paws, luscious fur, and crystal-like black eyes. Helen looked at Snowflake and gasped. Sophie said proudly, "Mom, I told you that Snowflake is great." Helen pursed her lips and looked at Sophie in disapproval. "Look at the carpet!" Sophie looked at Snowflake's paws and found that they had burned 4 big holes in her mom's precious carpet. "Snowflake! Snowflake!" Jacob waved his hand at it immediately. Oblivious to the damage it caused, Snowflake shrunk and withdrew the flames before jumping into Jacob's arms.
Mom, Snowflake didn't do it on purpose.
Sophie defended it.
Okay, go on with your meal.
Helen sighed helplessly. If compared with Snowflake, Sophie had damaged much more stuff when she was little. She was used to the damages in the house. Meanwhile, Dracon stared at Snowflake in Jacob's arms and asked, after a few seconds of consideration, "Which level is it on now?" "It should be on level 3, Jacob said. Snowflake wriggled in Jacob's arms, knowing that it has caused trouble. It tried to get into Jacob's necklace, but it couldn't get in since Jacob didn't open the space. "Since the red flames it spat out had a faint gold in them, I think they are not ordinary flames. The internal fires of spirit beasts are demon fires that can be used to make elixirs," Dracon said. Ever since Jacob took back hundreds of level 10 godly elixir pills from the Nine Dragon Palace, Dracon had begun to regard elixirs as one of the most important strategic resources. However, the godly elixir pills had too much energy and couldn't be taken in large doses, and they took a long time to digest. If North Atlantic and South Atlantic started the war, the elixir pills on and above level 3 were very important. Making elixirs? Jacob was interested. The only time he witnessed the process of elixir making was when the little boy made the pills to save Kenneth's life. He had seen the miraculous effect of elixirs with his own eyes. The elixirs that Elder Kayla made for Susan were just ordinary herb medicines. In fact, the real form of the little boy was a demon beast that had activated its intelligence. That was why the fire he spat could be used to make elixirs. Making elixirs with the fire Snowflake spits. Well, I might try it someday. I brought it up because we have a great treasure master in the North Atlantic, but we need a good elixir master. The little master is interested in making treasures. Although he can make elixirs, he rarely does it since it takes more time and effort, Dracon said. Especially making large quantities of low-level elixir pills. The little master wouldn't lower himself to make them, Helen added. After dinner, Helen urged Sophie to go upstairs for the tutoring session. Jacob followed her up to continue teaching her. Sophie didn't think it was a big deal when she heard that Grandmaster Hank had come to their city with 16 elders. If the North Atlantic Dragon Palace was considered the home base for the North Atlantic Dragon Clan in the ocean, then this city would be the home base of the North Atlantic Dragon Clan on land. From what she knew, people from South Atlantic were not powerful enough to cause trouble in North Atlantic's territory. After she finished her homework as fast as she could, she turned and stared at Jacob. Jacob took out the test paper from his bag and placed it in her palms. Sophie took it and started staring at him again. What? Jacob was confused. I spent all my pocket money on snacks. She hesitated a little. Why don't you ask your parents for money? Jacob glanced at her. I can't. Could you please loan me some? I promise I'll return it. Sophie gave him the puppy eyes. I'll give you some money, but you should save your pocket money. Jacob pulled out his wallet. Thank you so much. Sophie thanked him happily after receiving a few bills. In fact, Sophie had her own problems. Since Dracon and Helen wanted her to live frugally, they gave her very little pocket money each month. However, she loved snacks and sneaked out of school to buy them during lunch break every day. Also, she loved shopping and couldn't resist the pretty stuff that caught her eye. That was why her pocket money always ran out before the next month came. If Kenneth hadn't given her hundreds of dollars each time he saw her, her pocket money couldn't have supported her lifestyle. Now that Kenneth was out of town, Her funds were getting quite tight. For the first time ever, she was penniless. While Sophie was solving the test, Jacob was just sitting there and observing her. She looked quite pretty with her simple attire and focused face. Jacob didn't know what came over him. He took out his phone and silently clicked a picture when he thought that Sophie wasn't paying attention to him. But he forgot to silence the phone, which caused the camera's shutter sound to catch her attention.
"Hey, what are you doing?"
Sophie asked, while already reaching for his phone.
"Nothing."
Jacob held his phone behind his head, trying to get it out of her reach. His eyes were full of mirth, finding this situation quite entertaining.
"Give that to me. I swear, if you're taking ugly pictures of me, I'll..."
Sophie kept leaning further to get a hold of the phone. She was amused as well. While they both tried to get the phone, they kept leaning more and more on Jacob's back. Suddenly, Jacob's wooden chair tipped backward. Sophie didn't get the phone, but the momentum sent her onto Jacob's chest. She fell with him.
"Well, you are supposed to be studying. What are you doing?"
Helen had come up to check up on Sophie. Hearing the loud sound coming from Sophie's room, she pushed the door open. She saw Jacob lying on the floor with wide eyes while Sophie lay on his chest. Her lips almost touched Jacob's. Helen froze at the sight. Sophie turned her head and saw Helen. Immediately, her face flushed as red as blood.
"Mom, it's not what it looks like."
Sophie gave a feeble explanation.
"What does it look like?"
Helen walked into the room and asked.
Nothing."
Sophie stood up with a red face. Jacob cleared his throat and stood up from the floor.
"Go back to your studies."
Exasperated, Helen turned and left the room. Looking at Helen, Sophie knew her mother got the wrong idea. With a flushed face, she wanted to explain herself, but didn't know how. She touched her mouth and couldn't remember if their lips had touched or not. When Helen was out of the room, Sophie's flush began to decrease. After a moment of consideration, she turned to look at Jacob.
"Did we or not?"
she asked. "What?" Jacob looked at her in confusion. It was difficult to understand what she said. Seeing Sophie touching her lips, Jacob touched his own involuntarily.
"Well, did we?"
Sophie frowned anxiously. Jacob finally understood what she had been trying to say. The fall was so sudden, and Helen walked in so abruptly. In the panicky flurry, he didn't notice if their lips touched or not. "Maybe we did," Jacob answered after a few seconds of hesitation.
"Really?"
Sophie turned red once again. "What should we do then?" Jacob asked her.
"What can we do?"
Sophie looked at him with wide eyes.
"You took my first kiss."
Seeing her baffled reaction, Jacob laughed. Since Jacob laughed, Sophie looked at him suspiciously.
"We didn't?"
Inhaling deeply, Jacob looked at her. "Do you want the answer to be yes or no?"
Sophie
paused for half a second.
"I don't know."
"Well, then I don't know the answer." Jacob pushed the test paper on the table toward her. Episode 269. Youth Pills. Sophie's room was fragrant and quiet. Jacob tutored her until 9 o'clock. As soon as the session ended, Sophie almost pushed him out of her room due to her embarrassment. "I'm going to go to the Dragon Palace for a visit tomorrow. Do you want to come?" Jacob looked back at her from the door.
"I won't be able to. I've got school tomorrow,"
Sophie said with a regretful look. "Then should I come to tutor you tomorrow?" Jacob turned to look at her. She stood in the doorway and looked up at him, biting her lip.
I want to take the day off from the tutoring tomorrow, but come shopping with me on Saturday.
Jacob looked at her and nodded. Okay. He took 2 steps forward with the bag in his hand before turning again. Just the 2 of us?
Yeah, is that a problem?
Sophie looked at him in bafflement. No, just asking. Jacob nodded and turned to the stairs. Then, he turned his head and asked her, Was it our first kiss? I think when I first met you, we had... That doesn't count, Sophie said immediately. Jacob wondered how she decided what counted and what didn't. But, looking at her face, he decided not to ask and went downstairs. Dracon and Helen were watching TV in their bedroom. Jacob didn't disturb them. He walked out of the house quietly before releasing Snowflake from the hidden space and flying toward the university in a red energy sphere. The night passed quickly, and in the blink of an eye, Friday morning came. All the students were excited since the weekend was near. Sam would be leading their university's basketball team to play an away game this weekend. Since Kyle went to London, Sam had become the most important member of the basketball team. Due to the lack of a coach, he had to manage the daily practice of the team and got quite busy with it. Looking at Sam's empty seat while his classmates filed into the classroom one by one, Jacob felt a bit lost. When Kathy walked in, she looked around and spotted Jacob. Then she strode toward him. Sitting in his seat, Jacob watched as Kathy walked toward him.
Did you ask? Can we visit Susan today?
Kathy stopped before Jacob.
Oh, they said yes. You can come with me after school.
Jacob answered her.
Okay.
Kathy smiled before walking back to the front of the classroom. In the eyes of the guys around them, they were a perfect couple. However, Jacob knew that the relationship between him and Kathy was that of 2 childhood friends who cared about each other. It seemed like they had returned to the time of Jakey and Little Carrot in one night. After the morning classes ended, the students were all busy preparing to go home. Since Sam was busy with the basketball team and Jacob would also be away, the rest of his roommates decided to go home as well. Kathy walked to Jacob's side with her bag.
I need to go back to my dorm to pick up some stuff. How about you?
Kathy asked Jacob.
I thought we were leaving directly after school, so I asked the guys to take my books back to the dorm.
Jacob dug out a key.
I drove to school this week, and I have to drive the car back home. Oh, I didn't see you driving around.
Kathy walked out of the classroom with Jacob, shoulder to shoulder.
I didn't want to attract attention, Jacob said.
Kathy turned to look at him and smiled. She liked his low profile. They walked to the administration building, and Jacob drove Kathy to the dorms. He parked by the entrance and waited for her in the car. Shortly after, Kathy came back and got into the car. She asked him, after a moment of consideration,
Are there any shops near Susan's hospital? If not, can you stop on the right when you drive out of the gate, and I'll buy some fruits?
Hearing her words, Jacob almost laughed. Imagine taking fruits to the Dragon Palace, he thought. When Jacob didn't answer, Kathy leaned back on the seat.
Forget it. Let's find one when we get there. The fruits sold in the shops around the school are expensive and not fully ripe.
Okay. Jacob stepped on the gas and drove toward Sophie's home. Kathy didn't want to disturb Jacob while he was driving, so she looked out the window. Recently, she had been cultivating very hard but had little progress. She planned to ask the old master about it this weekend. Soon, the car arrived at Sophie's home. At the door, a black car was waiting for them. Elder Frank and 4 bodyguards in black suits walked toward Jacob's car.
Master Jacob, we'll go with you to the Dragon Palace, Elder Frank said.
Not seeing Dracon or Helen, Jacob knew that they were not going with them. Maybe they had more important business to handle. Elder Frank walked over and opened the door of the white Ford, handing a strip of black cloth to Kathy. Baffled, Kathy looked at him, not understanding his intention. "Kathy, cover your eyes with it. It will be fine," Jacob comforted her. Kathy looked from Jacob and the short Elder Frank before taking the black cloth and tying it over her eyes. Elder Frank got into the black car with 4 well-trained bodyguards. Jacob drove, following them. Except for the first time he met Elder Frank, Jacob had never been nervous. But now, Jacob felt pressured. Instead of guiding them, Jacob felt like Elder Frank and the 4 bodyguards were here more to monitor them. When they arrived at the seashore, Jacob helped Kathy out of the car. Kathy couldn't see through the blindfold, but hearing the sound of waves, she got very nervous. She tightly gripped Jacob's hand. Kathy was full of questions, but she trusted Jacob and refrained from voicing them. After opening the tunnel, Elder Frank led them into the North Atlantic Dragon Palace. Kathy was still blindfolded on the way. Finally, they entered a side palace. It was Elder Kayla's residence and where Susan was staying.
"You can untie it now,"
Elder Frank said. Jacob reached out and untied the black cloth over Kathy's eyes, and she exhaled deeply and looked around, finding herself in an ancient palace with water flowing hundreds of meters above her. Her look of astonishment was precisely the same as that of Jacob's when he first came to the Dragon Palace.
"We forgot to buy fruits,"
Kathy blurted out. Jacob's mind became blank.
"Is that Kathy?"
Susan's voice came from the room.
"It's me,"
Kathy answered in her clear voice.
"Come in,"
Susan said. Kathy stepped forward and pushed open the ancient-looking engraved wooden door. Jacob followed her, while Elder Frank and the 4 bodyguards stayed outside. Susan was sitting on the bed, cultivating with her eyes closed. At this sight, Kathy froze for half a second, only now understanding why Jacob used to go to Susan's office.
"Jacob told me that you were injured, so I wanted to come and visit you."
Looking around the spacious bedroom with beautiful stones paved on the ground, she said in a low voice,
"It was a minor injury. It's no big deal."
Susan looked very calm. In fact, Kathy and Susan weren't that close. Kathy wanted to visit Susan out of kindness and didn't expect that she would end up here. "Oh, another thing." Jacob suddenly remembered something and took out a small box from his hidden space. From the small box, he picked out several small, bright red flowers. "These are the red flowers you mentioned last time. I found them." Susan was calm, but her eyes lit up instantly at the sight of the red flowers in his hand. The main ingredient of a special elixir. She thought that she would have to go to the Snow Lotus Cave on Sky Mountain for the flowers, and it was a surprise that Jacob had found some for her.
"Where did you get them?"
Susan had been pale due to her injuries, but now her face flushed with excitement. "I got them accidentally." Jacob didn't tell her that he bought a dozen of those small flowers for only 1 mid-tier spirit stone at the trading convention on Fifth Heaven. Susan didn't probe. Instead, she grabbed the red flowers from his hand and murmured,
"Youth pills." "What are youth pills?"
Seeing Susan's passionate expression, Kathy blurted out. Remembering that there was someone else in the room, Susan cleared her throat and put on a calm and mysterious look.
"Oh, youth pills are pills that can sustain one's looks permanently. In other words, they are pills that could keep people forever young." Forever young?
Hearing her words, Kathy got interested and curious. With the red flowers in her hand, Susan thought for a moment before turning to Jacob.
In North Atlantic, who can make elixirs?
Making elixirs. Jacob thought for a while and could only think of the little master. There's one, but he has a weird personality and rarely helps us. In fact, after making a pill for the clan last time, he expressively told us that it would be the last time he helped us, Jacob said. Susan did some calculations and said softly,
With a top elixir master, these materials could make 3 youth pills if 100% successful.
She had known that youth flowers were growing together with the 7-colored snow lotuses in the Snow Lotus Cave on Sky Mountain, but she wasn't sure if they were mature or not. Besides Sky Mountain, the other place that had youth flowers was Fifth Heaven. If she failed to find them after breaking into the den of the snow lions, she would take the risk and break into the cultivation sects on Fifth Heaven to find them. That was why she was greatly pleased when Jacob got her more than a dozen mature youth flowers. After all, the cultivators didn't care about old age. As long as someone looked young, they were young. For Susan, who wished to push the limit of cultivation, it would affect the elevation of her realms if she tried to sustain her youth with her cultivation strength. The only solution to keep her youth without affecting her cultivation was taking youth pills. In fact, the youth pills would not only sustain her youth, but keep her body in a healthy state as well. She would remain a junior in the cultivation world as long as she didn't reach the heavenly dragon realm. Youth pills were not useful to realm elevation, but they were treasures in the eyes of all female cultivators.
Jacob is quite resourceful.
Susan had a higher regard for him. Then she looked at Kathy and hesitated for a few seconds.
Kathy, your master can make elixirs, right?
Kathy blinked cluelessly.
I have no idea.
Susan knew that cultivators on the soul formation realm could do anything in the world. It was nothing for them to make a super powerful treasure, not to mention some elixirs. In the Dragon Palace, Susan was debating with herself if she should ask Kathy for help or not. At the same time, on land, the doorbell of Sophie's home rang.
Who is it?
Helen, who had been doing some work, went to open the door. On the doorstep stood a white-haired old woman.